a pleasure to be here. This is my third Boulder Startup Week, different topics each time. I love speaking to Boulder folks, and I live in Boulder. I would normally be wandering around, but I had knee surgery a week ago, so thus this old person walker over there. I'm loving that. So I'm stuck in this chair with a lot of stuff around a knee. And I'm also on narcotics, so there's a more than zero chance I might forget I was here next week. So if you approach me later, I might not remember. I hope I do. Who am I? I am an organizational psychologist. I've been working in talent strategy for 30 years. And I help senior teams be effective, and I help big organizations and mid-cap and late-stage startups evolve their teaming abilities and get through transitions. It could be a new leader coming on board. It could be figuring out how to work with Generation Z. Show of hands, who in here is Generation Z? You were born 1996, 97 to 2012. Okay, who's millennial? Look around, notice who's in the room with you. Okay, who's Gen X? Who's baby boomer? This is the wisdom, folks. Keep the hands up. That's who you talk to in the networking. You really, really do. Anybody older than baby boomer, and you're just well preserved, you look great. Okay, so we got a good panoply of folks here. Entering into a conversation about generations research always has a couple of headwinds with it. The first one is, this is the most individualistic country on the planet. So all of you in here have been raised in a culture that tells you you're very special, you're very unique. I've been raised in that culture. We don't like to be put in a box, if it's a generations box, if it's a personality box, unless it feels good to be put in that box. So I have that coming at me to present data to you. The second thing is kids todayism. We're all doing that. There's a superiority that happens when you're a generation or two older than any other generation coming up. And you want to look at them and say, they just don't have the resiliency. They don't have the skills. They need so much help. I was one of those people that really questioned that. And I thought, oh, there's a myth around generations. There's not a lot of difference until I started looking into this data. Why did I get into generations research? I'm not a generations research by PhD. I'm an org psychologist with 30 years working in business. I got into this because I was concerned. I was concerned about the headwinds coming at Gen Z and wanting them to be very successful in the workplace. They have a superpower that you're going to learn about in this presentation that'll take a little while to realize, but well positioned for startup land, well positioned for that. All right, so let's get into the data while you have those biases I already put into your brains front and center, so you can work to move those aside. Some of this data may not make sense to you. You may say, that's not me. If you are Generation Z, that's not my kids. Your friends probably do fit into a lot of this data. And why do we care? We care so that as managers, as founders, you know what to do to help this generation be successful. If you are Gen Z, there'll be some tips here to help you enter into the world of work, startup or otherwise, to help you out. So we're going to do three things here. We're going to talk about the key factors. When I look at all the data, what does the data say? And we have a lot of data that go back decades on generations research. What has impacted Gen Z's development into workers? How are they showing up? What are the behaviors we see in the world so far? Now, the oldest of you are 26 or 27. So it's going to take a little time for us to see how you're impacting the world of work so that we get some valid data in. But we have some leading indicators. And then what are the implications? And we'll focus on founders, but also for Gen Z workers, because many of you in here are Gen Z. Maybe you're checking both of those boxes of Gen Z and founder. So what is the data? When you're looking at generations research, you don't want to go on Google and say, well, what did people think the generations are different? You're going to get small sample sets of people you know. That's really not valid data. So when we're looking at generations research, we're looking at comparative research studies. And we have a lot of that, going back to the 1960s. And what you do is you ask individuals who are age 15, 16, 18, 20, 21, questions about their lives. And you get them to give you answers. You aggregate that data, and you're able to see what generations look like when they were that age over the decades. So that comparative research is what we're looking at here. These studies are mostly what you draw from, and there's a lot of other ones, but these are together, we're looking at 39 million responses, 39 million data points. So this data is quite solid. We're also looking at correlation analyses. So you'll see this when it comes to the impact of social media on depression and anxiety rates and mental health. So we're starting to build some solid cases for policy. TikTok is going through Congress right now. That's a direct result of looking at the impact on mental health and social media exposure. I've also had conversations and interviews with HR leaders. I work with a lot of heads of HR. I present to heads of HR, and so I have happily aligned to hear what they have to say about what's coming in the door. What are the complaints that are coming to you? How are you engaging with this generation? How are your leaders engaging with this generation? And selected one-time survey data, being very cautious of how often you look at one-time survey versus comparative research. Okay, so let's get into the factors. I have a social psychology lens to this. I'm not going to say, oh, they've all grown up with technology. Well, millennials grew up with technology. So we're really looking at what are the factors that aggregate to make this generation's upbringing distinctive. Well-meaning but overprotective parenting. And I think a lot of you might nod and say, yeah, my parents didn't let me walk down the block without walking right behind me. Yeah, I was a counselor in a counseling center in Denver as a part of my PhD. And I'd have parents call me up and say, well, how's my kid doing? I'd say, you have to ask your kid. They're running their lives. So this well-meaning but overprotective parenting and very little unsupervised, meaning adult unsupervised time, has impacted this generation. And if you aren't that generation, you can imagine that it's kind of hard to build independent living skills when you've had your parents calling the shots a lot for you. You're gonna have to work hard to kind of catch up with that adulting that you need to take on. There's a lot of data to show you about overprotective parenting, very little unsupervised time, but this is one piece. You can see that the percentage of Generation Z who worked in high school has dropped by half. 20% of Gen Zs held high school jobs compared to 40% in other generations. There's data on college-aged workers holding jobs. So that may not be you, maybe you're in here because that's not me, and I worked and that's fine, but this is what 39 million responses decade after decade tell us. What does that mean if you're a startup founder? That means you have a generation coming in the door that really have ambition and are struggling with how to work, most of them. They just haven't had those roles that other generations have had the good fortune to have. You learn how to settle conflicts with colleagues. You learn how to show up on time. You learn how to manage your career path earlier. And then this little unsupervised time, this is a concern, but it is being rolled back. I will say that we're moving from, you could be put in jail if your child or teenager doesn't have adult supervision around you. That's a jailable offense in many states. But now we're seeing this roll back, so there is a backing off of this. And if you're a millennial, you probably resonate with some of this too. Yeah, my parents are a little too involved in my life. Okay. The second factor affecting and shaping Gen Z is the college experience. College has been dramatically moving away from an open exchange of ideas. And this is a little ironic because college's reason for being is to have that space to move around different ideas. We have trigger warnings, we have safe spaces. Now, I'm all for the safe spaces that create actual physical safety, but emotional safety, ideological safety, that is not an okay thing to bring into college. You should be uncomfortable most of the time when you're moving through a college experience. So there's going to, if you are Gen Z, you're going to have to do some catch up on how to embrace ideas that make you uncomfortable, A lot of headlines across the nation. This started in the Ivy Leagues and has been moving west. A lot of firings of professors with vocal students saying, I don't want to hear this idea. This makes me very uncomfortable. Okay, so this is a factor that is walking into the workplace and needs some help to dig into ideas more fully and sit with that discomfort. Now this one, all right, lives spent in this fishbowl of social media. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. That's a social media platform. I am addicted to this platform. So I'm not the one to stand here and say, well, you should just not be on social media. First, none of you would pay attention to this. You live your lives entirely on social media, and I would too. But we do see the linkages between these dramatic increases in depression, anxiety, suicide rates, 112% increase in depression symptoms and reporting to mental health settings from 2012 to 2020, 112%. I mean, if you had a 20% increase, that's a huge, huge increase. So this is a generation that's really hurting, that is internalizing anxiety and needs some support and some psychological safety from you as leaders and founders to help them bring their best forward. They're not making it up. This is hurting. It's hurting this generation. Now, there's a lot of data to show on this, but this is a big study from 2022 from some leaders in the field, Twenge and Haidt. They've conducted a study of 350,000 people strong across the US and UK. And this is what they found. Effect size means there's a big effect from one thing to the next. We see the effect sizes are comparable to other factors that are linked to mental health, like binge drinking, like sexual assault, like obesity, like drug use. So don't discount the negative impact of overexposure to this. All right, the fourth is a pandemic at really not a great time for this generation. You know, if you didn't have enough headwinds to try to get a hold of, and my God, school shootings and, you know, climate change, now we throw this at you where you're not able to engage with your peers and with professors one-on-one. The results on test scores have decreased during the pandemic time. So it doesn't mean that if you are Gen Z, you don't have a solid brain that's working hard to figure this out. You just have this at a really unfortunate time developmentally. You're learning interpersonal skills. You are figuring out how to engage the world. And now you're in your basement and not able to engage in the way that you need to develop that skill set. And the final factor here is leading to a good one, changes in societal discourse and in demographics. This is the most diverse generation this country has ever seen. What do you think that has to do with ties to innovation outcomes in startup land? A lot. So it doesn't mean that this generation is going to come to you with all the great ideas. Please don't put that burden on them. They're just getting in there, okay? But they can really embrace collaboration across diverse groups much differently than past generations have, even millennials. So this is a real strength. Societal discourse with the Me Too movement, with Black Lives Matter, these kinds of debates feel a little reminiscent of the 60s, right? That kind of debate can bring to bear ways of doing work that need to be looked at and probably thrown out. Kind of the BS of let's not tell people the salaries and all that corporate bullshit. Thanks to this generation, we're starting to say, yeah, that dog don't hunt anymore. Let's really change this. So what do we see with these factors and how Generation Z is engaging in the world? I interviewed a CHRO, and this is what she talked about. She said it's the purpose-driven nature of Gen Z that's even more top of mind than for millennials. They need development on how to kind of mature this in the world of work, but that has to do mostly with age. But it's a driver for many of the Gen Zs, and so we hear a lot about that. If you are Gen Z, you're going to say, yes, I'm driven by purpose, and you better tell me what that is, or I'm not going to get on board with your mission. Startups are in a great position to make the links between mission and purpose and help to speak to that when you're hiring Gen Zs. Now, it is a little bit of embracing diversity with an asterisk. Diversity is defined often by this generation as long as it's a definition of diversity that I approve of. Okay, that's going to take a little bit of maturation so that more definitions of diversity are welcomed into the workplace. But gosh, this is a group and a cohort that can help guide the way for society. I think we're going to see that happening. This is a leading indicator. What else we're seeing is this generation still learning how to manage independent living. That well-meaning but overprotective parenting has set this up. So again, we're not saying this is not a generation that's not capable of independent living. It just means they're taking a little bit more time to do it. Less developed interpersonal skills, that pandemic effect, okay, that's landing here, where it's not just about showing up and engaging with friends. It's about how do you show up on teams and collaborate when a lot of what happens on teams is uncomfortable. And it takes a lot of nuance on how to network successfully, how to work in a team environment. It's going to take a little time for this generation to get there. So your job as founders and as leaders is to help them, not to say, how come they don't know, to understand the background so that you add that to your list of what you need to do as a leader. We also see some delays in managing this. We're back to this managing uncomfortable feelings, anxiety and ambiguity. And if you doubt that, look again at the dramatic rates of high anxiety and depression with this generation. There's no arguing with that. A lot of this uncomfortable feelings is being internalized. And if you've been raised for a good chunk of your, or all of your life up to this point, without enough experience having anxiety and letting it just sit without resolving it, that's a hard thing to take on and resolve in later life. So help this generation to kind of manage that and sit with ambiguity. And gosh, is there ambiguity in startups? Is there ever a pivot? Yeah, maybe every week, maybe several. Finally, we see that this generation needs some help on how to see the gray in things, how to develop critical thinking skills. When people say, what are the two biggest markers for this generation? I'll say, managing emotions effectively. They need help with that. Help them with that. And this, help with critical thinking. Why is this such an outlier? Because unlike any other cohort, the demand of this generation to have big picture critical thinking skills is right out the gate. Any other generation had some time. You didn't really need to do that in your first or second jobs. But this generation, because of technology, has to do that right out the gate. And so it's a little unfair. There's a lot being demanded of them to step into these higher level skills, but the requirement is definitely there. They have to do it. So your job as a leader is to help not catastrophize events, see that a lot of things are in the gray. There are few right answers in the workplace, but this may be a little bit new territory for Gen Zs. Okay, so now we're going to get to what this means for founders. We're going to talk about what it means for Gen Z, and we'll have some time for Q&A and some discussion, okay? If you are a founder, raise your hand if you're a founder. Is everybody in here? This is a founder track. Doesn't mean that you're founding something. Okay. All right, so this is for you. Some tips, how to help, how to call the best out of this generation. And you may be in that generation while you are a founder. First, help your Gen Zs to process emotions, the full panoply of emotions, to sit with difficult ones. There are two ways that I think are a really solid way to do this. One is role-playing conversations. And it's not just high-stakes conversations. It could feel really high stakes. I mean, think back when you were that age. Even going to a peer and talking through a meeting where you felt some tension in the air might feel really high stakes. Have an offer to have a role play. As a leader, you should be having 30-minute weekly meetings with every direct report, one-on-one. Tons of data to support that efficacy. Put your phone away. Don't look at your email. Really be there with that person. Help them to prepare for these conversations. And then model healthy coping skills. You can't expect any worker to show up responding to their world in healthy ways if you're not working on your own responses to the world. So what is a healthy coping mechanism? What's an unhealthy coping mechanism? Help this group to understand the difference. And they may already know it. They may have already been parented very well around this, but landing in workplaces is going to feel really different. Second tip, teach conflict skills. On the heels of this processing emotions tip, what is a conflict? Also teach what a conflict isn't. Not everything needs to be a big thing. If you are Gen Z, pick one thing to be very, very offended by. Just like one thing. Get activistic about it. Go do stuff. And the rest of the stuff, maybe you sort of let it go. Know that time is going to take care of a lot of this. There are lots of ways of teaching conflict. Avoiding a conflict is a fine way of approaching conflict, and addressing it in a variety of ways is a fine way. So again, use that role play, help understand how to unpack conflict. And there are three kinds of team conflict, by the way. There are task conflict, what are we going to do for this problem? There's process conflict, how are we going to go about solving this problem? And there's relationship conflict, are we okay? Are we okay? So at the minimum, teach what team conflict looks like. And then this notion of authenticity. Authenticity is a big need for not only Gen Z, but for millennials. And thank goodness it's here. Again, with the corporate bullshit, it needs to be called out. And when something's not working in the workplace, when there's two-facedness going on, we're very glad that there's a generation and two by this point that is calling a spade a spade. But there's a notion of personas, and if any of you know, I'm sure some of you know what a user persona is, right? If you're doing product pathing. Okay, so it's a little bit like this. To have your authentic self show up to work, you need to know the core of you. But that doesn't mean you show up the same way with every context. I'm in a persona right now, presenting to you. This is a different context and a different persona than I have talking to my mother later today or engaging with a friend. So know when you put a persona front and center and forward and move a persona to one side. That is healthy and adaptive. So no, don't be the same person every place you are. Know when you have to dial it back and you need to move some parts of self forward and some parts back. That's a mature integration of self. It's the work of a lifetime, frankly. Active listening skills. People know this phrase, not if you know what active listening skills are. Okay, there's a collection of active listening skills, and I gotta tell you that it is a thing that I'm constantly teaching leaders. CEOs, I'm teaching them how to model active listening skills, and they screw this up all the time. And then I get mad at them, I say, oh God, we've talked about this. Let's practice reflective listening. What is reflective listening? So, as a founder, please work on putting the phone away, stopping the email. When your Gen Z or anybody reporting to you is showing up with a problem, if now's not a good time, say, now's not a good time, I'm distracted, can I meet with you at 3 o'clock today? But give the active listening time, the focus. You are using probing questions, you are summarizing what people are saying, you're picking up on the emotions going on. It sounds like you feel this about that, am I right? That is going to create psychological safety for everybody, in particular your Gen Zs, so that they can hear hard to hear feedback later. You're making deposits into that bank account. But that active listening skill set is fundamental. Let's talk about purpose. This is a purpose-driven generation, and millennials are too, but even more so with Gen Z. Help your Gen Z to tie your startup's purpose to career ambition. They're just starting out their career. Your career is going to change a lot. You're probably going to have a zillion different jobs and different career paths in your time in the world of work. But if you are a startup founder, you can help forward load this path for them by asking some questions about how the mission of your startup ties to somebody's career interests as they're developing. So you're helping them also see that big picture. Remember the critical thinking, big picture need? Help that with these conversations, and they'll be very vested in them because it's their career. Help your team to build these critical thinking skills. Give kudos often when you see that demonstrated. One thing pulling here will pull 7 other things in an organizational structure. Help to unpack, okay, what do we think this is going to mean for this other thing, this other thing, this other thing? Do some Socratic kind of questioning on that. And that'll help your team, in particular Gen Z, build that critical thinking skill set. I use a black hat, white hat exercise. Basically, that's a devil's advocate thing. So you can do that if you're positioning a product or you're going to market or you're going to talk to a customer or whatever. So now you be the other side of this, even though you might be advocating very hard for doing X instead of Y. Let's say we were doing Y. You get to wear the black hat. Tell us how you're going to engage with that other side, and then you switch it. So normalize the fog of ambiguity is another tip. What do we mean by that? The fog of ambiguity. Startups are constantly in a fog of ambiguity. You don't know if you're really on the right path, and sometimes you get a wonderful lockdown on a project, or a customer says yes, or your beta went well. Great. That fog is lifted for the moment, but pretty soon that ambiguity is going to be back. So you can help your Gen Zs by saying this is normal and healthy. Again, that sitting with uncomfortableness. Work offers few right answers. When you have about 60, 70% of the data, you pull the trigger on most things. There's a lot of data on that percentage as well. So help them normalize that. And then finally, back to the psychological safety thing. This is appropriate for any team member, but in particular, a Gen Z who's just entering the world of work. How likely am I to take some performance feedback from you that's a little hard to hear if I don't feel like you have my best interests at heart? If I don't feel like you've given me some kudos for good performance up to this point? Don't avoid difficult feedback that's clear. Don't do that. Give honest feedback, and a little bit more than millennials, this generation in the data is showing that they want more honest feedback. They're showing a little bit more than millennials even did at their age. Okay, now we're going to move to Gen Z, and then we do some Q&A or some discussion. If you are Gen Z, limit that social media activity. And I just know that a lot of you are going to walk out of here and not act on this tip at all. But understand the linkages between your mental health and how often you're in that comparison fishbowl. The data is long since in about this. You were unfortunately raised at a time where your brains were developing, where you didn't get that negative impacts consciously. Now we know. Do something about it. This is a two-parter. I mean, this is a tip for Gen Z, but also for founders, so you can make sure that you give this to your Gen Zs. Build focused work time. Create a strategy and tell everybody about it. If you need 9 to 11:30 every day in focused work time, where you turn off your email, you turn off your phone, and boy, are you going to want to have that dopamine hit. You're going to want to grab that and see what's up. You're going to make up a reason too. You can't get a lot done, and in order to kind of build a attention span that's more robust for complex information, you're going to need to train your brain to have extended periods of work time to get that work done. And then share that plan with everybody around you. If you're a founder, you have to not contact your whole team with every little ask. That's what the staff meeting is for in 2 days from now. Give the update then. Don't bother your team with those things. Protect them so that they protect that time. This is probably going to raise some eyebrows. Don't bring your whole selves to every context. We talked about this earlier with the founder tip around authenticity. Be conscious that these are not your friends you're working with. You could be friendly with them. They are your colleagues. They are your boss. This is a potential client. You behave differently with these different groups of stakeholders in your sphere than others. Reputation management is a module on leadership and team development for a reason. You're building reputation right now. What do you want that reputation to be? Colleagues are quitting at jobs in Gen Z's age because they're tired of being the counselor with other people showing up telling them about what's happening in their love life for 2 hours a day. Keep that out of the workplace. It's okay to vent about what's happening with your founder leader, but don't gossip at work. Don't bring that to the other people you work with. Be very careful of the reputation you're building. So bring your core of yourself. Work on developing what that looks like, and you don't know that yet. Hell, I don't really exactly know that yet, and I'm in my 50s. So it's going to take you a little while, but be very careful about how you are creating an impression in the world. Don't use passion or even talent as your career compass. Now, this has to be wrong. Everybody tells you follow your passion. I got told that, and I'm Gen X. So I will have a caveat. You do want to follow some of your gut level guidance about what your passions are. Yes, pay attention to that. But talent, that doesn't run the game. What wins the game is getting good at some stuff. And you won't know whether you have great passion or that you have inherent talent for something until you've encountered a lot of hurdles and until you've failed a whole bunch. I mean, startup's all about fail fast, right? You're going to have a lot of false starts. Let that talent and passion kind of take a little bit of a side seat or a back seat while you become good at a set of skills, and then you'll get some feedback about that, and that takes some time. Find a good mentor. I have 3 right now. They've changed with probably every decade. You have to have some people in your corner that will support you, that will give you honest feedback about how you're showing up, and it may be uncomfortable to hear, but also are your biggest fans. Choose wisely. Don't use peers or your boss to process all your feelings. Now, I do have an asterisk here, too. I've just said you need to role play difficult conversations. That's appropriate. Bring some I felt this way about that thing with that team member to that conversation. You do need to process some of those with your boss. Don't do it with your peers that much. And take all of that out of the workplace. Again, reputation management. Never forget, there is a hierarchy, okay? As much as startup land might tell you, oh, we're very flat, everything's very matrix, very holocratic, don't believe them. There's a hierarchy here. And if you're stepping out of that hierarchy too much, or treating your boss like your friend, or your peers like they're just one of you and we're all just rolling up our sleeves together, or worse, if you're a founder making that error. There is a hierarchy in life. There is a hierarchy in the workplace. And even if we are a place where we want to work together in a collaborative, flatter way, I've done a lot of culture work. I've helped move organizations to holocratic org structures across country borders. So I'm a fan of this if the business strategy could support that org design. But there is a hierarchy. Work to live the middle way. What do I mean by that? Nothing is ever as bad as it sounds and feels, and nothing is ever as good as it seems. That's living the middle way. If you keep yourself from moving up to the heights of this feels great, that'll pay benefits when things feel really shitty. You remind yourself, this is going to pass. This wonderful thing right now is probably not as great as I think it is, but also that terrible feeling is probably not as bad as it seems. That's just life wisdom. And then finally, remember that piece about purpose-driven nature, very demographically diverse generation? This is, as a founder and as a Gen Z, where you want to juice it. This is a generation that can help understand what core values mean for a startup, and your cultures as startups will evolve. They'll move from wherever they are now to something that's going to feel different. As you bring more diverse talent into your workplaces, into your teams, it's going to be kind of harder to hold on to that core set of values, but also you're going to have much better ways of approaching problems because diversity of thought has direct links to innovation outcomes. Lots of data on this. This generation can help you. They can help understand how to speak to that client set, how to understand how to solve problems across demographic groups. So offer to do that, Gen Zs. Guess where we're at? Now, you've had a lot of data come at you, a lot of thoughts. Let's see, we got to do a time check. Good, we got 12 minutes. Yes, for Q&A. And thoughts, what are they?
What's the definition of?
Thanks, everybody.